Before the light touches the domes of Constantinople, the darkness in the workshop is thick as oil, and in that darkness, a man named Theophanes is already awake, lying motionless on a thin blanket, listening to the city breathe. The bells of Hagia Sophia are still silent, but he hears them in advance, in his mind, the way a painter hears a color before he mixes it. The air in the room smells of dried linen and old wood, of wax that hardened overnight in the vessels beside his bed, and of something deeper, something that is not a smell, but a presence, the scent of incense that has worked its way into the walls over the years, into the very wood of the tables, into the skin of his hands, until he can no longer say where his body ends and the workshop begins. He rises slowly, for his joints are older than they should be in a man not yet 50, but hands that have held a brush for 30 years know the price of their craft. He goes to the window, a small opening covered with oiled cloth that lets through only a grey, milky light, and through that light he looks toward the east, where, beyond the silhouettes of churches and houses piled one atop another, like waves of petrified sea, the waters of the Bosphorus still sleep, black and faceless, though he knows they will soon turn silver, then gold, then blue, all the colors he has tried to capture his whole life and never fully caught. In this stillness before dawn, while the city still breathes slowly and evenly, like some great sleeping creature, Theophanes allows himself a rare moment of memory. He remembers how, as a boy barely 7 years old, he first entered the workshop of his teacher, old Nikephoros, whose hands were already trembling with age even then, but whose eyes still saw color with a precision the young Theophanes could not have imagined possible. He remembers the smell of that first workshop, almost identical to the smell he now breathes in his own, as if the craft itself were a kind of reincarnation, the same breath passing from one pair of lungs to another across generations. Nikephoros told him, on the very first day, a sentence he has since repeated to every apprentice of his own: the hand that paints holiness must itself become empty, like a vessel that is filled only when it has been emptied of itself. He did not understand those words then. Now, 3 decades later, he is only beginning to sense their full meaning, and suspects he will not grasp them completely until his deathbed, if even then. Outside, the first roosters begin to call from the courtyards scattered through the district, their voices interwoven with the distant sound of cartwheels rolling early goods toward the market. The city wakes layer by layer, the way his icons are built layer by layer. The darkness slowly yielding to light, not suddenly, but patiently, as if dawn itself obeys the same canon that governs his craft. He descends the narrow staircase to the workshop below, where his apprentices are already stirring in half-sleep, young men whose breathing is still heavy with dreams, whose hands will not be steady enough for the work awaiting them for a few years yet. He does not wake them loudly. It is enough to light the first candle, for a flame flickering in the darkness has its own language, a language everyone in the workshop has learned to understand without words. One by one, the boys rise, wash their faces with cold water from a copper basin. And the silence that surrounds them is not the silence of an absence of sound, but the silence that precedes prayer. Before any panel, any color, is touched, they kneel. This is not formality. Theophanes learned it from his own teacher, who learned it from his, back through generations of painters whose names no one remembers anymore, but whose hands are, in some way, still present in every line he draws. To pray before painting means reminding oneself that what one creates does not belong to oneself. An icon is not art in the sense someone from the Western marketplaces might understand it. It is not an expression of his soul, his imagination, his vision of the world. It is a window, and he is only the one who polishes the glass. The workshop wakes together with the light. Through the open door drifts the smell of baking bread from the neighboring house, a smell that mixes with the scent of varnish and tincture. with the sharp smell of vinegar in which parchment is cleaned, with a sweetish smell of wax that one of the apprentices melts over a small ember in the corner. The sounds of the city gradually grow louder, the first footsteps on the cobblestones, the first cries of fish sellers already arrive from the shore, the far-off, almost unreal sound of boatmen calling to one another across the water as they load their vessels for the day's crossing. All of this enters the workshop as part of the day, not as a disturbance, for Theophanes learned long ago that the silence he seeks is not the silence of the world, but the silence within himself. The first task of the day is preparing the panel. Today they are working on a large icon of the Mother of God, commissioned for a monastery outside the city walls, a panel of linden wood, smooth and dry, already covered with a thin layer of linen soaked in bone glue and prepared with chalk and gesso to become a surface perfect enough to receive gold. Theophanes runs his fingers over the surface, feeling every uneven speck he missed earlier, every small flaw that could later betray itself through the layers of paint. This touch, this attention that allows the mind no room to wander, is itself a meditation. Today we do the gilding, he says quietly to one of the older apprentices, a young man named Andronikos, whose hands are already steady enough for this work, but whose eye has not yet learned to see the difference between gold that merely shines and gold that lives. Gilding is work that demands breathing. Without breath, a leaf of gold thinner than a spider's web must be transferred from its cushion onto a surface coated with a thin layer of bole, a reddish clay that gives the gold a depth pure gold alone could never have. And the slightest breath of air, the slightest tremor of the hand, can ruin an hour's work. Andronikos holds his breath, as Theophanes taught him, and the leaf of gold settles onto the surface like light that has decided to become matter. 1 moment, 2, 3, the gold adheres, and the young man slowly, carefully releases the breath he was holding. Theophanes watches, says nothing, for praise in this moment would be a disturbance, a break in a concentration still being built. Instead, he turns to his own part of the panel, where he prepares pigment for the robe of the Mother of God, grinding lapis lazuli into a fine powder in a small stone mortar, adding a little water, a little liquid glue, murmuring under his breath words that are neither prayer nor song, but something between the two, a rhythm his hands follow as they crush stone into a color that will one day gaze upon thousands of faces bowed in prayer before it. The stone he grinds came from far away, from the mountains of Afghanistan, carried through caravans and harbors and the hands of countless merchants before it reached this small workshop in the heart of the empire. This thought sometimes stops him mid-work. How many hands this stone has passed through, how many languages it has heard as it traveled, how many seas and mountains it has crossed only to end up, at last, as the color of the sky behind the head of a woman who never existed in this form, and yet exists everywhere, in every home, in every church, in every heart, seeking comfort. The sun has now risen high enough that the light through the window turns golden, and that golden light falls directly onto the panel, covered in gold leaf, and for a moment, the entire workshop seems submerged in liquid light. This is the moment Theophanes lives for, the moment when the boundary between labor and prayer, between craft and revelation, entirely disappears. He pauses, brush hovering in the air, and simply watches, allowing himself the rare luxury of pure contemplation before returning to the work. Midday brings a short pause, bread and olives, and a little watered wine, eaten in silence on the bench outside the workshop, where the sun warms the stone beneath their feet. The street is full of life, a woman carrying water in clay jars, a child running after a dog, an old man sitting in a doorway, watching passers-by, with the calm of someone who has seen enough years to no longer be in a hurry about anything. Theophanes watches all of this with the same attention he devotes to his work. For he understood long ago that the faces he paints, though saintly, though transformed through centuries of canon and tradition, are nevertheless drawn from the observation of real faces, real expressions of sorrow and peace and compassion he has seen on these very streets. While he eats, a neighbor named Callistos, a leatherworker whose shop borders his workshop, comes out to stretch his back after a morning bent over the tanning vats. The two exchange a few words, as they do every day, about the price of salt that has risen again, about rumors that a new ship from Trebizond will bring better pigment than can be found in the local market, about Callistos' daughter who is soon to marry a young fisherman. These conversations, ordinary and everyday, form the fabric of the city that Theophanes could never paint directly, but which, in some strange way, nourishes every line he draws, for the holiness he tries to conjure on the panel is not separate from this life scented with leather and salt and simple human concerns, but arises precisely from it, the way a spring bursts forth from ordinary earth. After the meal, while the apprentices still sit and talk in low voices, Theophanes withdraws for a moment into the courtyard behind the workshop, a small, almost forgotten place where a solitary fig tree grows, its roots breaking through old stone slabs. Here, in the shade of its leaves, he allows himself a few minutes of complete stillness, gazing at the patch of sky visible through the branches, listening to the hum of bees that have found their way to the early fruit. This courtyard is his refuge, a place where a mind saturated with color and technique and attention can finally rest in pure, purposeless attention to the world, which asks nothing of him but to be present. The afternoon is devoted to the most demanding part of the day, painting the faces. For this, Theophanes allows no one to help him, not even the oldest and most skilled apprentice. The face is what carries the soul of the icon, and the technique he uses, called proplasmos, requires layers of dark earthen color as a base, over which he will gradually build lighter tones, layer upon layer, until the face begins to emerge from the darkness, as though it were being born onto the surface on its own, rather than being created by him. His hand is steady as he draws the first lines that will become the contours of the face of the Mother of God, but his mind is not empty, quite the opposite. It is full of images, memories, prayers he has spoken his whole life, stories his mother told him as a child about a woman who carried the weight of the whole world in her arms and still found a way to smile through tears. He does not attempt to translate these images directly onto the panel that would be overly ambitious, almost blasphemous in its aspiration to let personal vision replace centuries of tradition, but he allows them to illuminate every stroke of the brush, the way candlelight illuminates a room without becoming the room itself. There is a moment in this process, always the same, always equally surprising, no matter how many times it repeats through the years, when the face on the panel stops being merely an arrangement of lines and shadows and begins, in a way Theophanes cannot fully explain even to himself, to look back. This is not a moment that can be planned or summoned by will. It comes when it comes, usually somewhere between the third and fourth layer of lighter tones, when the edges of the shadows soften enough for the face to begin breathing. When this moment occurs, Theophanes always pauses, his hand trembling slightly, and he whispers a brief prayer of gratitude, not because he believes he himself created that gaze, but quite the opposite, because he feels something has been given to him, something beyond his own skill, something that comes through him, but not from him. Andronicus, who has by now finished the gilding and is quietly assisting by mixing new tones of color according to his instructions, notices this moment of pause, and though young and still impatient to learn all the secrets of the craft at once, has learnt to respect this silence. He asks no questions. He simply waits, mortar in hand, until his teacher begins to breathe evenly again and returns the brush to the panel. As the afternoon wears on, the light in the workshop changes quality, growing warmer, more slanted, casting longer shadows across the tables covered with tools and pigments. One of the younger apprentices begins to hum a quiet melody while preparing a new batch of panels for tomorrow's work, a melody he heard in church the previous Sunday and now unconsciously repeats as his hands go about their work. Theophanes does not interrupt this. The song is, in its way, another form of prayer, and the workshop functions best when filled with this kind of quiet, unforced devotion that is not so different from breathing. As the sun approaches the horizon, Theophanes knows he must stop painting faces. The light becomes too changeable, too tinted with the orange and red tones of sunset for him to trust his own judgment of color. Instead, he turns to simpler tasks, preparing materials for tomorrow, cleaning brushes in diluted vinegar, sorting pigments by color and value into small wooden boxes lined with cloth. While performing these simple, almost meditative tasks, he allows himself to think about the icon he is now creating, not in terms of technique, but in terms of its future fate. He imagines it hanging in the dim chapel of the monastery, lit only by the flame of candles, watched by the eyes of monks who come at dawn for matins, touched by the lips of the faithful seeking comfort, receiving kisses and tears and prayers from generations yet to come, long after his own name has been forgotten. This thought does not bring him sadness at his own impermanence, but a strange peace, for is this not precisely the purpose of his craft? To create something that will outlive him, something that will continue to carry light long after his own hands have fallen silent forever? The apprentices begin to withdraw as the light fades, one by one extinguishing the candles they used through the day, leaving only one or two to light the way to the door. Theophanes remains last, as always, sweeping his gaze across the workshop before extinguishing the final flame himself. He sees the unfinished icon on its easel, its face only partly shaped, the eyes still empty, waiting for tomorrow's light to continue their slow, patient birth. Outside, the city has begun to quiet for the night, but not entirely, never entirely. For Constantinople, this city, at the border of two worlds, two seas, two continents, never truly sleeps. From far away comes singing on the water, sailors returning from long voyages, their voices carried by water and air through the narrow streets, mingling with the scent of salt that always, in this city, finds its way even to the most distant workshops. Theophanes steps out onto a small terrace above the workshop, a place where he sometimes sits in the evening, when his mind is too restless to sleep at once. From here, he can see a patch of sky above the rooftops, a patch that changes every night in color and texture, but which always carries the same message that the world is larger than the small room in which he spends his days, larger than gold and pigment and technique, larger even than the tradition he serves. The stars begin to appear, one by one, as if someone somewhere were lighting candles in the dark, and Theophanes wonders, as he wonders every night, whether the gold he laid on the icon today managed to capture even a fragment of this light, this silence, this feeling of being watched by something far older and far more patient than himself. Watching the stars, he recalls words once spoken to him by an old monk from the very monastery for which he is now painting this icon, a monk whose name he has forgotten, but whose words he could never forget. Every star is an eye looking down, and every eye you paint is a star looking up. Your task, my son, is to join those two gazes, so they no longer differ. At the time he was young, and these words sounded poetic, but far from the practical reality of the grueling work with pigment and gilding. Now, with 20 additional years of experience in his hands, he is beginning to understand that no technique, however perfect, can replace this kind of attention that treats every stroke of the brush as a conversation between heaven and earth. The sea in the distance reflects the last traces of twilight, deep blue slowly turning black, and the wind coming off the water carries within it a coolness that reminds him autumn is near. that soon more candles, more fire will be needed to warm the workshop through the long winter days of painting. But tonight, the air is still mild, almost gentle, and Theophanes breathes it in deeply, allowing the scent of salt and smoke and distant incense from the nearby church to blend into something that is no single smell, but the very smell of the city, a smell he has breathed his whole life, and will, he supposes, breathe for as long as he can breathe at all. In the darkness that has now fully settled, the only sound that remains clear is the sound of water striking the stone shores beneath the city, a rhythm older than the empire, older than the churches, older even than the city itself, built upon these shores. Theophanes listens to this sound as one listens to the breathing of a sleeping child, with an attention that asks for nothing but presence itself. When he finally returns to his small room above the workshop, he does not light a candle right away. Instead, he sits a moment in the darkness, letting his eyes adjust, letting his mind settle from a day filled with color and light and attention. Through the thin cloth over the window, he can see the faint glow of moonlight, enough to illuminate the outlines of the room, enough to show him the way to his bed without need of further light. He lies on his back, hands crossed on his chest in a pose that has become habit through the years, and listens as the last sounds of the city quiet into something more like a dream than wakefulness. Somewhere far off, a single bell tolls, once. Perhaps a signal for some night prayer in some distant monastery, and the sound travels through the night air all the way to his window, where it turns into something soft, almost tender, before falling completely silent. His last thought before sleep is not of gold or pigment or technique, but of the face he must finish tomorrow eyes, that must look with that blend of sorrow and peace characteristic of all his finest works, an expression he has tried to master his whole working life, and which, he knows deep within himself, he will never fully master. For perfection is not for human hands, not even hands that have devoted an entire life to trying to capture even a shadow of the divine. And in that thought, in that acceptance of his own imperfection as part of the very process of creating something sacred, Theophanes finally finds peace enough for sleep, while the city around him continues its eternal breathing, waves striking the shores, stars turning their slow, ancient path across the sky, and somewhere in the darkness, on an easel covered with cloth, an unfinished face waits for the light of a new day to continue its slow, patient birth into gold and color and faith.